Well, I'm here today with Mike Kraft, who is with the Delta Wind Farm, and you actually have a company, Alaska Environmental Power, and so your company is not actually affiliated with Golden Valley or any other of the big utilities, right?
Oh, no, we're a totally private company that there are 3 investors in the company. I am the managing partner. I own 50% of it, and Richard Clymer and Marvin Hall. You guys might know them as Clymer, Hall, and Davis.
Right, okay.
Those guys saw what I was doing early on and wanted to partner up, and that's our company, Alaska Environmental Power.
And the reason why I have you here is that there's been an effort, basically, to try to diversify the energy production because we're paying too much for our energy here in Fairbanks. And I'm hearing a whole bunch of different percentages being put forth at these Golden Valley Electric meetings that I think, I almost get the impression that they're doing it intentionally to try to confuse people so that they just trust whatever the experts tell them about, you just let us decide.
This particular expert right here who works in Maine, I know we have companies. I know we have companies in Alaska. This is a Maine company that is a hired gun. And these are the guys that are basically gaming the public. And I thought about that word, and I haven't used it really in this context, but it just is so appropriate.
Well, and if you think about it, the idea of where do you get electricity from? Most people just say, I just plug in the plug. I get it from the wall. They don't think about that somewhere out there has to be some kind of electric generation machine of some kind.
I think, to be honest, the public expects that our utility, our co-op, okay, that we're paying top executives $300,000+ a year to operate and run. Most people expect that those guys are going to be looking out for us, and most people expect that they don't have to put their time and effort into micromanaging these people because supposedly they are, quote unquote, the experts, and they are, quote unquote, looking out for our interests. And that's just not the case here.
Well, you think about the idea of wind generation. People have, we've seen the efforts throughout the centuries. Windmills, hello. We know that there's power in wind. We know that you can harness it and use it to move things mechanically. You know that you can harness it to generate electricity. When you see those in California.
Well, think about just in terms of sailing ships.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it opened up the world. Yep. Wind has really opened up the access to the world.
And now wind power is pretty much free.
Yep.
When it comes down to, but it's
as a fuel,
right? As opposed to diesel or coal. It's a lot cleaner too, isn't it? Generally.
Well, not according to Golden Valley. This is one of the gamings that somehow my wind farm is going to make the air quality in Fairbanks worse. So, I mean, if you're Golden Valley, you can even spin that.
Okay, so the wind, which is being produced down in Delta Junction, which is 90 miles away from Fairbanks.
Correct.
And that somehow that wind is making the air quality in Fairbanks.
Well, no, the fact that I'm using that wind to make electricity in Delta is somehow forcing Golden Valley to use its really dirty generators to follow me, to back me up, which is completely false.
Well, right now, they're not getting any of your energy at all.
Well, my energy doesn't see the light of day in Fairbanks. Every time I drive down to the wind farm, I drive by, there's a Black Angus farm right there on the Alaska Highway, and the guy loves Christmas lights. And every time I go down there in the wintertime, I see this, huge 2 acres of Christmas lights on, and I know darn good well that power is coming from my wind turbine. I just get the biggest kick out of that. But we supply enough power basically to run about 550 houses on average every month. And that's at 2 megawatts. And we've been limited to that. We were limited to 100 kW at first. Then we were limited to 1 megawatt.
What's limiting you?
Golden Valley's willingness to buy the power. Okay. They will not sign a contract.
What's your capacity?
My capacity is 2 megawatts at this point. So they're buying everything I have. I built out to everything I could possibly build out with their restrictions. It's kind of like telling somebody they can open up a coffee store on the corner, but they only get to serve 10 customers a day. It was intended to bankrupt me. It was intended, the practice of limiting me to those levels was to, the scale of economy is pretty tight because you've got to have infrastructure. You've got to have the land. You've got to have the access. You've got to have the power lines. You've got to have people working, and there's overhead.
But at the same time, where you've got somebody who's already built a wind farm, who's already generating electricity, and Golden Valley says, hey, we can do that too.
Well, I think that's exactly what happened back in 2010.
And they built the Eva Creek farm, which on this graph that you brought me is the blue line, and your graph there is the red line.
Correct.
And they're using this to say, look, we can't buy your power because we're producing power at the same time that you're producing power. And if you actually look at it, you'll see a lot more spikes with the blue where it completely cuts off because it's a completely different wind source.
Exactly.
And
well, they're having trouble. They're having trouble up there because wind turbines. When people aren't aware that wind turbines, they start out at 3.6 meters. Okay, well, I'll convert that to miles an hour. At 6 miles an hour, the blades are turning. Okay, at 22 miles an hour, the turbines are at full capacity. They're making as much power as they can make. That's at 22 miles an hour. At 50 miles an hour, a turbine shuts off because it's too much energy. It's too hard on the turbines, and so they go into a protective mode. And so what that's called is an overspeed event. So the turbines at 50 miles an hour completely shut off because if they don't, another gust above 50 miles an hour will drive them into an overspeed mode, which will basically tear the thing apart. And so what you have happening at Eva Creek is the winds come up pretty quick, the wind farm's at full power, and then all of a sudden the wind dies off and the wind farm goes from 24 megawatts down to zero in less than 10 minutes.
Which would be kind of inconvenient if you've got your video plugged in and you're watching a movie and you're halfway through the movie and all of a sudden the power cuts out.
Right. Well, see, so Golden Valley has to spin reserve for those events that are happening at Eva Creek. And they are trying to imply that my wind regime would cause that problem to get worse, when in fact my wind farm could be the spinning reserve for Eva Creek. I could still be making power when Eva Creek drops off.
Once again, two totally different wind sources.
Totally different wind sources.
And geographically, let's put it in perspective.
150 miles apart.
Okay, they're 150 miles apart. Eva Creek is up on top of a mountain ridge.
3,300 feet in elevation.
Delta Wind Farm is down at
1,300 feet.
And the delta wind is coming not from the big storms that pass through, like the Eva Creek farm. The Eva Creek wind farm, that gets its wind from when the storms come through.
Yep, that's a storm-based event. It's a lower and high pressure system that moves through the Alaska range, and everybody knows that the wind gets funneled through the mountain passes. My wind is a function of barometric pressure differentials between Northway and Delta Junction. It's cold, dense air that flows down the river like water.
So basically, you have all that cold air that kind of pools up behind Wrangell St. Elias and then just kind of flows over the top.
Well, it flows down the backside of it and lands in the Yukon River Valley and the Tanana River Valley, and flows like water because it's trapped on the north by the 40-mile country and it's trapped on the south by the Alaska range. So it comes down the Tanana like a river.
It's just channeled through there.
It's channeled.
Yeah, and if you look at in terms of the actual amount of time that it's on, and again, I apologize that you can't see this better, but you'll see with those where Eva Creek is getting some spikes, you've still got the more sustained event going on.
I'm not here to say that we don't have the perfect wind, but it's just about as close as you're going to get on this planet. We break world records at Delta Junction. Delta Junction has turned out to be one of the highest capacity factors for a wind farm anywhere on the planet, where they're building wind.
So if you were allowed to, you could build.
That's a good word.
You could build more turbines.
Oh, I could tell you right now, if I was allowed to, back in 2010, if we would have been successful, we would have been saving about $4 million a year annually to the shareholders of Golden Valley. We would have displaced 4 million gallons of diesel a year out of the air of North Pole.
But that would have meant that they wouldn't have been able to charge us that diesel surcharge on our bill.
And we wouldn't necessarily, I can't say we would have cured the air quality issues, but we certainly would have done a lot to mitigate that. I mean, 4 million gallons.
Hang on a second. Where are they burning this diesel that's giving us the power in Fairbanks?
In North Pole.
Gee, isn't that where they say the worst
That's
air
the worst
quality?
air. And it's PM 2.5, which is associated with diesel. It's sulfur.
PM 2.5 is in everything, Mike. What people don't seem to understand about it is that is a measurement. That is like saying, I've got PM 2.5 of this piece of paper right here. It doesn't tell you what it's coming from.
I have to say, I've been listening to this discussion about air quality in Fairbanks. I've lived here 35 years, okay? I got here back in the 70s. We had ice fog, but we didn't have the crap we have now. And I know that when we had the problems with the fuel and we were using an oxidizer in our fuel, that absolutely made it worse because you couldn't follow somebody that was burning that in their tank because it stunk so bad, and it burned your eyes. But I know that probably 400 pictures I've taken over the last 10 years of Fairbanks. When I drive into Fairbanks from Delta, first thing I see is Eielson Air Force Base. Okay, I see their carbon footprint. Then as I come over the overpass there, I see North Pole. And just behind North Pole, I see the coal plant at Fort Wainwright. I see the coal plant in downtown, and I see the coal plant over at the university. You got 3 coal plants within 10 miles of each other in a bowl, in a thermal inversion.
And yet they're blaming the wood burners.
Yeah, it makes no sense. You know, this town is, I mean, all you got to do is go up to Hagelbarger on a cold day and look down into the valley, and you can see these huge plumes that are coming up and dumping. Now, everybody likes to say, well, that's steam. Well, it's not steam. The EPA found radiation. They found lead, mercury, cadmium, beryllium laying on the ground in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Avenue in 2013.
I'm a runner, and as I run around the coal plants, I see black everywhere.
Well, that's not. You mean that's not steam?
I don't think that's steam, Mike. Steam doesn't make
Well, I
me
know
black.
that there are people in this town that have suffered because of this issue. I mean, and quite frankly, I mean, I never went into this as an environmentalist. I went into this as an industrialist.
But look,
Okay?
there's money to be made.
I'm a
right?
developer, okay? Now, I've always been green. I know that you don't pee in your own well. I mean, everybody knows that, okay?
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea, okay? Bottom line is, now that I've had to face these issues and go up against people that are claiming certain things, and I've done my homework, I'm scared for our community. I'm scared for the kids and the grandkids that live in Fairbanks. What are they going to be dealing with 20 years from now with respect to respiratory issues and stuff? I've got 3 grandkids that live here. That scares me, okay? When I know what's going on, and I've seen it for myself.
And you're offering a way to help reduce that on an industrial scale. We're talking about making it so that they don't have to burn as much diesel or not have to burn as much coal.
You know, and like I said, I looked at the economics of it when I first started looking at this. I knew we were paying 143% higher energy utility costs than anywhere else in the country. Yeah. And I knew that we didn't have any jobs. In 2007, I'm a developer, okay? I've always worked 10 years in the future. You don't build 400 home sites without looking in the future.
Right.
Okay? I live in the future. And I knew what was coming. I knew that our legislature was going to let us down, and we're going to be right where we're at right now. I saw it coming. So I thought to myself, do I take my money that I've earned over the last 35 years and go to Hawaii? Or do I go to California? Or do I go back to Virginia where I was born? What do I do to stay economically engaged? Because I'm not selling gravel. I'm not selling home sites. The people that worked for me for the last 20 years, I don't have anything to offer them. So I thought, well, you know what? I could do something about this renewable. You got the federal government pushing renewables with incentives. You've got the state of Alaska passing an energy policy, said they want to be 50% renewable by 2025. You've got the surveys that Golden Valley members took several times, saying that 85% plus of the people surveyed wanted renewables.
Well, that's why they went out and built the Eva Creek Wind Farm on top of a mountain.
Well, don't forget, you got to be on a rail car to get there.
That's right.
You don't just drive there.
And what does the rail car run on? It doesn't run on wind.
Well, bottom line is there's problems with Eva Creek.
Diesel.
I'm not going to say that Eva Creek isn't going to help Fairbanks because, quite frankly, I'm glad to have another wind farm because I believe in them. I believe that renewables are going to help us in the future. They're certainly going to help my kids and my grandchildren. So I can't argue with the fact that we've got Eva Creek online. I will never do that. That would be, in my opinion, kind of hypocritical. But there are problems. You know, they spent $90 million to build Eva Creek at 24 megawatts. My project in 2010 was about $54 million for the same size wind farm. Now, every time there's a problem with Eva Creek, who's on the hook?
Golden Valley Electric.
Golden Valley Electric Association. Okay, what happens if my turbine goes down in Delta Junction? That's my problem. You're not going to pay for a down turbine. You're not going to pay for turbine repairs. You made a deal with me to buy a kilowatt hour of electricity. That's all you're on the hook for. If I don't produce, you don't pay.
But Eva Creek was built with the Golden Valley Electric.
Golden Valley, well, $10 million from AEA. They got a grant, $10 million grant. So we've got an $80 million loan hanging over our heads for a wind farm.
And that has to get paid back.
It
whether
blocks
or not,
us from supposedly this cheap green power that's going to come out of Healy too. At some point, God only knows, you know. And I'm so tired of the gaming that's gone on with the public. You know, I've had to compete with Wantana Susitna Well, Mike, how are you going to compete with that? I've had to compete with trucking gas down the Dalton Highway. I've had to compete with a pipeline up the Parks Highway. And the bottom line is, none of that stuff exists.
Even if they made that stuff exist overnight, there's absolutely no idea to see how much energy would actually be made from that stuff, because all of that, like you just said, none of it exists. All of that has been theoretical.
Yes.
All of that has been, if we did this, then maybe that would happen, whereas you have a proven record.
Well, you bring up the proven fact. One of the complaints that Golden Valley made in my request for interconnection was that I didn't give them data, okay? And that is absolutely not true, because it's one thing to put up a med tower and test the wind for a year or two and make an educated guess about what will happen when you put a mechanical device out there, okay? Machines are machines. They have their own minds. So when you have a turbine that's been in operation for 8 years, and you can look at the throughput, okay, what a turbine actually did in a given wind site, that's a lot better than a guess about what might happen.
Isn't that what we're looking at
That's
here?
what we're looking at right there.
We're talking about actual data.
Right. And so all Golden Valley had to do was, I have two 900 kilowatt turbines. All he had to do was cut the power production for the year in half and look at one half of it to see exactly what my wind farm would produce and how often it would produce. And yet they're claiming that they just didn't have the information. And they had the best information, because this isn't a guess. This is actually something that has occurred.
But they didn't pay their friends to get that information.
No, that's right. The guy in Maine didn't get a dime out of that.
The guy in Maine. This is who they paid. Wait, what's that address again? That's not an Alaskan address, Mike.
No, they don't use Alaskan. They bring experts from the lower 48.
How much again are the top people at GVA making? 300.
Well, last I heard, there were
a year,
300,000 plus a year, and I think there are 6 positions that are in that neighborhood, including the new position for John Burns. And this cracks me up. You got John Burns, who's probably a pretty good attorney. I've known him for about 30 years, and he had his own law practice here in town, and he was a partner with Corey Borgeson. But he was doing work for GVEA on the side, okay, by the hour, and all of a sudden he's got this position that's called Vice President in charge of legal affairs. And I don't know his salary, but I can't imagine how much a guy like John Burns would want to make if he was on the clock full time and not be able to work his private practice. And so you've got a lawyer for the CEO, you've got another lawyer who is full time at Golden Valley, but yet they still got to hire the most expensive lawyer in Alaska, Robin Brenna, in Anchorage, to do their legal work. They still got to hire a guy in Seattle to do their legal work. So why are we paying two sets of lawyers to do one job?
Well, because it's about making energy for the people, Mike.
And that's just
you wouldn't understand. You just make energy for the people and get paid.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of the basics of the way wind power works, it's basically like anything else, like with water power. You put up a dam and you release the water through a turbine. It turns it. There's a minimum that it starts turning.
Yep.
For wind, it's 6 miles an hour.
6 miles an hour.
There's a maximum where you're getting the
22
most
miles an hour.
The most out of that turbine you're going to get, and then if you get more volume through it,
you start spilling it. You pitch the blades out. And you spill it up until you get 50 miles an hour, and then the turbine says, hey, we're going to shut off because I could get a gust that could take me into an overspeed, which is what tears turbines
and that actually tears things. And I've seen that happen. I've actually been in Delta Junction in the military back in 94. I think it was September of 94. They scheduled an exercise during hunting season. Right, so we're down there in Delta Junction, and we're doing our thing. They had to end the exercise early because the wind event that came through, I don't know how gusty it was, but we had one of those mobile kitchen trailers that literally got twisted around like a corkscrew by that wind. Tents were flying down, and we got up and ran in the middle of the night into a vehicle.
I can tell you for a fact that I have gambled my life developing the Delta Wind Farm. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, I'll give you an example. It's 50 below zero. It's 100 miles from my house to the wind farm. Communications is down. I don't know what the wind farm's doing. I've got to go out there. So I drive 100 miles at 50 below zero. I get out to the wind farm, and I get into the man shack, and I get the heaters turned on, and I start looking at the communications issue. And all of a sudden, I find myself, okay, well, I've got to spend the night here. And suddenly you realize, well, if there's a fire or if anything goes wrong whatsoever, there's nowhere to go.
Right.
It's blowing 45 miles an hour. It's 50 below outside. You've got about 35 seconds of exposed skin before you're in serious trouble. So I left my car running all night long. So I had a lifeboat. Those are the kinds of situations that it takes to develop these kinds of resources.
Well, and great entrepreneurs and industrialists have done that throughout history. They put their own money and their own lives on the line to go out and develop something because it can make money, but it also ends up helping people in the long run. And to see the retrograde manner in which Golden Valley is holding on to diesel is making it that you can only buy the wind farm through the wind farm that they built with the money that they took from us to build it, that they will only employ their friends who are in their secret lawyer club.
I call it the circle of trust.
The circle of trust. I'd like to see it called the circle of life and see a little, whatever. Where do we go from here? Because obviously you're actually making something of value that the rest of us up here could use. Mm-hmm. Is there currently any kind of connection, electricity intertie between Fairbanks and Delta?
Well, it's funny you ask that because everybody likes to complain about, when I say everybody, the utilities on the railbelt grid like to complain about how bad the railbelt grid is. These are the guys that have been operating it for the last 30 years. These are the guys that should have been putting money aside for the last 30 years to upgrade that system. They haven't done it because they have little kingdoms that are disconnected from each other. Okay, there's 6 utilities on the railbelt grid. None of them have done anything about the infrastructure, the interties. But it just happens that we've got the pump station in Delta Junction. That's electric. We've got the missile defense. That's electric. We've got Fort Greely. That's electric. We've got Delta proper. That's electric. Oh, and by the way, we got a 30-megawatt gold mine called Pogo that's pretty close to Delta that also is electric. So all these consumers are on that end of the grid. But in between Fairbanks and Delta Junction is a 138,000 volt transmission line to supply all that power. So power can go both ways.
So right now we've got all that power being sucked from Fairbanks down to all of those different consumers.
And at a line loss.
Right.
Because when you send power 100 miles, you've got to step it up. That's a 3% loss. You've got to wheel it. That's another 2% loss. Then you've got to step it down to get it to the consumer. That's another 3% loss. And so all those losses, so we make, let's say at North Pole, we make 100 watts. 92 watts is going to make it to Delta. There's 8 watts that are gone by the time that power gets to Delta. That's an 8% loss. If I'm producing power in Delta, Golden Valley's buying it from me in Delta, there's no losses. So when Golden Valley buys a kilowatt hour from me, they get a whole kilowatt hour because it's already there. That's another advantage of being in Delta. And the intertie between Fairbanks and Delta is one of the strongest stretches of the railbelt grid there is.
I'm really at a loss. I honestly, I cannot understand why it is that they don't want to buy your power, except the fact that they don't own your farm.
Well, I've looked for logic for 10 years. I've looked for the logic because, quite frankly, I mean, as a developer, I've cut my losses before. I've made mistakes, and I've had to back out of things that I started because maybe I bit off more than I could chew, or maybe I made a mistake. And I've been looking for that logic, and I can't find it. The logic of why they are being so uncooperative with an independent power producer, I just can't find the logic in it. And so that kind of makes me think about, well, if there's no logic involved, what's going on here?
Well, let's talk about air quality for just a minute. I know that you and I have talked about this before, but in terms of this particular conversation, you've got the diesel being burned in Fairbanks.
North Pole.
Which is where they've got the worst air quality. You've got the wind, which that's not making any pollution at all.
Nope.
That would make it so that they wouldn't have to use as much diesel.
That's right.
To generate the electricity. When you compare all the coal plants, we're talking Eielson, North Pole, Fort Wainwright, downtown Fairbanks, and the university.
Yep. There's not one in North Pole, though.
Okay. What do they? They just burn diesel.
They just burn diesel there.
So you've got all of these polluting factors that are putting out PM 2.5.
Well, the PM 2.5, that doesn't scare me as much as lead, mercury, beryllium, and radioactive materials.
And that stuff's not coming out of wood.
That stuff's not coming out of wood.
That stuff's coming out of coal.
That's right.
And diesel.
And
you've got something that could greatly reduce the dependency on coal and diesel.
Coal is a hard nut to crack because it's so cheap.
Right.
Okay? Now, if you're not assuming the human loss, the human cost, okay, people's lives, if you're not looking at that side of it, coal is so cheap, it's hard to compete against coal. But I can certainly compete against diesel and natural gas with wind, hands down. And if you took into account...
Oh, you know what? I think I figured out what you can't compete with. You cannot compete with the EPA grant money that comes in for having bad air.
I don't know about that, but I wish the EPA was a little more proactive. I mean, I saw a study somewhere that and they, this is a hard thing to put out there, but I'm going to put it out there. There's only one city in the United States growing slower than Fairbanks, Alaska right now. That's Flint, Michigan, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is? Oh, that's right. They can't drink the water because it's full of lead. So that's the only city growing slower than Fairbanks, Alaska right now. Why isn't Fairbanks growing?
Because we're breathing all the zinc and lead. And
I mean, that's part of the problem. I mean, our legislature certainly helped, but certainly our environment is why, if you think of Alaska, you think, God, I'm going to go up there and have clean water and clean air. It's going to be pristine. I might have to pay a little more to heat myself. I might have to buy more clothes. It might cost me a little more to run my vehicles and stuff. But you know what? I want to live in Alaska because it's pristine. It's clean.
Now, Mike, here in Fairbanks, I can't just say, I want to buy some of your wind power because there's no way for you to get it to me.
Right.
What can I do to help get your power to Fairbanks, or at least onto the grid for GVA?
Well, I think there's really only one thing that the average person in Fairbanks could do at this point, because it is somewhat complicated just in the way it's presented. But one thing is for sure. Everybody that goes to a Golden Valley Board meeting gets 3 minutes. You get 3 minutes to put your 2 cents on the table. And I think we all know that, I mean, especially the people that have been to the Borough Assembly meetings and the other town hall meetings and the other community meetings that go on, that a lot of times our 3 minutes fall on deaf ears. Mm-hmm. But if enough people show up and use their 3 minutes to talk about what's important to them, that's how you make a change.
All right. I want you to give an email address or a website or both so that people can get in contact with you and then start sharing this information.
Sure. It's Mike Craft, one word, MikeCraft, at akwind.net. And if anybody wants to call me, it's 907-388-9917.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I want to do this again. Maybe if folks have questions for you, they can email them to me and we can do another interview. Steve@radiofreespeech.com. I'd like to get this word out. I'm going to give you the link to this podcast and send it to everybody. And let's just circulate it around, because I really hate that we've got this interference in a free market idea because of politics.
Well, the whole thing here is, from a Fairbanks builder's perspective, okay? I've got people that are relying on me for their livelihood. These are people that have helped me get where I'm at, and hopefully I've helped them get where they're at. The jobs that this creates. I mean, the economic opportunity to build and go to work. I mean, we all know that the capital projects are gone. We're not going to have any more capital projects. We're not going to have the kind of spending in Fairbanks other than this F-35 thing. What is on the horizon that you're going to be able to go and work at? And I can tell you how far this could go. We export oil every day in a pipeline, and we send it away in ships. We could be sending electrons in the form of electricity through Canada to the lower 48 with a 100-megawatt wind farm in Delta Junction. That would be so many jobs you can't even count them all. You couldn't even phantom the economic development opportunities that would come out of having that kind of a size of a wind farm in Delta Junction. All those ag parcels down there where those guys are being paid not to grow anything could put some turbines on their land. They could get revenue off of them for the rest of their lives. We could be exporting electrons as much as we're in the amount of energy I'm talking about, as much or more equivalent to what the pipeline ships out of Alaska every single day.
In terms of actually having an intertie then with
That's
Canada.
right. That's right.
Well, Mike, thanks for being here. It's Mike Kraft. I'm Steve Floyd, and this is RadioFreeSpeech.com.